Good morning, ladies, MBs and gentlemen, and welcome to Badger Bodges, with probably the only painting tutorial we're going to do on Badger Bodges. My friend asked me, I sent him a picture of an orc I'd painted, and he asked me, how do you paint them? He was particularly interested in how do you get, the dark recesses. And I thought, well, I explained it to him. He didn't quite get it when it was written down, and he said, well, why don't you do like a video? And I thought if I'm doing a video for him, I might as well do it for everyone. That does mean, however, that I don't have the setup, I don't have the proper rig to do a painting video. And also, I would say in general, you don't want to paint like me, and I will explain that as I go along. But let's get started, shall we? So, 2 preparations have been done to this orc. So I thought I'd do an orc, being my friend was interested in an orc. Number 1, he has been sprayed just black. Black Halford's black spray, classic. And then Halfords do like a camo brown. It's very flat brown, which I also use. And that provides the basis for the model, which we'll discuss as we go along. Now, the reason I say you kind of don't want to paint like me is I have to compensate for the fact that I have a slight tremor. I don't know if you can see it on camera. So on both hands, it's not bad. You wouldn't notice it in everyday life. But when you're doing something like model painting, which is a detailed sort of thing, you start to notice it, and it kind of puts things like edge highlights out of reach for me. I can't really do them very well, and it's quite tiring to do. So what I try to do with my models is get them to be highlighted and everything kind of sorted before I even put any colour on, which is why I use an undermask. Now what I've done there is just got some beige out, Vallejo beige, put it on a nice flat stiff brush, and the camera's also upside down, so I'm just going to have to aim. I'm just going to be doing quite a heavy dry brush initially with this beige, really trying to get more or less all over, not thinking about lighting, and just dry brush over the whole thing, and only leave the real recesses to be that dark brown. I used to use Vallejo German black brown for the undercoat. The only reason I stopped was because spraying is quicker. It's a slightly different colour, but not so different that if there isn't a mistake, I can just, if I've missed a bit of the spray, I can just patch up with what German black brown I have. So here you can see I'm going fairly liberal on him. Got my wet palette here. You can make your own wet palette. I have an army painter wet palette because I treated myself basically. And you can just go all over. And what this does, you can probably see it's picking out the high levels and also the mid levels as well of the model, because I'm doing it quite thick. Sort of halfway between a dry brush and what's called an overbrush. One thing you do have to be careful of, because you tend to do dry brushes, I tend to do dry brush front and back, I do then have to make sure I do actually do the top. Sometimes I accidentally miss the top or the sides of things, and it ends up with a very weird, unnatural effect. I mean, all of this effects will be unnatural. My blue tack I sprayed a model with it on, and I think the paint's got into the blue tack, and it's made it really not very good blue tack. Okay, so I've done that. So now we have this orc, kind of picked out everything but the recesses in a nice dry brush. We'll wash our brush out. I'm going to visually inspect the model and see, sort of down by his skirt, maybe we'd want that with a bit more filled in, with colour, with beige, because, maybe the light would hit there a bit better. So, just going to get my smaller brush, same again. By the way, I'm drying it off on an apron that I wear. I'm just not showing you the apron because I don't think you need to stare at my legs whilst I paint. I'll just do that. By the way, the brushes are just ones I bought from Hobbycraft. Were not overly expensive for what they are, especially being I dry brush with them. You don't want massively expensive ones for dry brushing because it's a bit harsh on the brushes, especially how I paint. Okay, so we've got that. There we go. The other good thing about here is you can start to scout out the model. Ultimately, you dry brush, I dry brush, whatever, so it doesn't matter at the beginning, but I can start to scout out the model and see, well, what needs painting? You know, what would I want to paint them as? So I'm seeing here that, you know, he's got a kind of scale mail vest, he's got a skirt, he's got what looks like bare legs to me. A bit hard to tell, I could possibly do them in a colour as well. He's got kind of leather boots, he's got a leather shield with a wooden inside. Looks like there's some points there where I might want to do some rivets if I can, you know, if my hands are cooperating. Helmet, he's got his face, he's got his teeth. I mean, we might just want to try and leave the dry brush on because that'll probably do the teeth. And yeah, look like other bits of leather on him as well, and a few bits of skin on the hands and arms. So that's kind of what we're dealing with, and so we want to try and pick that out. Now, because I'm doing orcs, I've got a lot of colours here that I kind of use as a general palette, but we don't want it all to look the same. You know, I don't want every orc to look the same. Now that we've done our like quite thick beige undercoat, we're now going to move on to doing a nice lighter dry brush to highlight things. Now I'm using white, just Vallejo white, and this one goes on a bit more subtly, not majorly subtly. It's a dry brush, you can't do much of it, but one thing, I'm just trying to go down the model, almost like a trying to be a light ray, and I'm using a lot less on my brush. And white also naturally just won't cover as much as this beige, and that is just trying to just pick out the real highlights of the model. So that's why I'm mostly just trying to go down. I might have to vary up a little bit, but there we go. And so now we have a highlighted model before we put any colour on. Now I quite like them at this stage. I think they look like nice little statues, but you can't have your whole army like this, unfortunately. Well, you could. Be an interesting artistic choice. I did see a guy who was struggling to paint his models because of his hands. You know, they cooperated even less than mine. I think he physically couldn't paint. And so he made a black board so that his grain models would show up less on. I thought that was a really good idea. But I did wonder, you know, even if he can't do it, could he get someone to just dry brush his models? You know, spray them black, dry brush them grey. It's even you can even say it's an artistic choice. And that's what I say. Like, if you really are struggling because of your hands, a dry brush is nice just to kind of give them some, you know, to show that you do want to paint them at least. If you're like me, you've got a fair bit of control, just a little shake, we can do a lot more. Now, I need to start to think now, what kind of colours do I want to do? Now, I love this Griffhound orange from Citadel. I don't tend to buy Citadel paints very often. I think Vallejo are better, but you've got to give it to Citadel. Their contrasts are pretty good. They were the first on the market, so you know, we all ran out and bought them. And they do hold up, I think. I know there's a new formulation, but I don't think they did badly on their first attempt. So I do use them. Now, I may or may not use the wet palette when I'm using these. What I'll often do is just get them and then just wick some of the paint off. And then the great thing about contrast paints is that, you know, they highlight themselves, and combined with the work we've done in adding highlights, we're going to get a really dramatic effect. So I'm just going to gently put this orange down. Now this is a very quick technique as well, so I'm going to try and do this all in one take. I'm a messy painter normally, and trying to hold this under the camera is making me even messier because I'm not quite holding it the exact way I like to. but we will try and be as careful as possible. So just get underneath his skirt as well, where there's a lot of brown under there, like the original brown, so it won't make much of a difference, but you know, I'd notice. And then go up there. Also, yeah, if you make a mistake and you hit a bit that you don't want to, you can just put a little bit of white on there, or you can go back with, you know, some mud. This also looks like a full tabard, like it looks like his skirt comes down from this tabard, so we'll paint the whole thing. Right, my pot is closed. Now we could leave this at this, to be honest. Like, this is a fairly decent orange, it's fairly solid. But I probably won't. We'll do a little bit more. I think that's possibly a more leather area. Interesting. See, scout your model and then you still see interesting things. It's the first time I've ever painted this guy. Yeah, I've not painted any similar like him. So there we go. You can kind of see how, you know, it's highlighted itself, and you know, the fact that I've done those deep highlights as well has really changed it. Another colour I like from contrast is Skeleton Horde. It's just a nice colour, and I'm going to use that for other bits of his clothes. I kind of like to have their clothes be a variation of colours, and because, you know, we've done all the highlighting, it kind of gives you the freedom to do that, because you haven't got to think, okay, for every colour I'm going to do, you know, I'm going to need to, in this case you might put down sort of a sandy colour and then have to highlight it, and maybe you want to mix white, or maybe you use a different highlight because, you know, mixing white isn't the best way to highlight. You know, it avoids that problem, really, and avoids that dread. I get a lot of dread from trying to do real highlights. So there we go. And I'm thinking, maybe his trousers are... oh, there's a bit of bleed there. Oh dear. A bit of bleed between the Skeleton Horde and the Griffhound, because I'm trying to do this quickly. Yeah, I'm looking at that, I'm thinking maybe his trousers would be another colour, so another browny colour. I've got Agaros Dunes. I promise this won't all be contrast, I'll be showing you a couple of other things as well, but I'm just trying to block out his clothes, and I find contrast and dry brush works well for clothes, so I'm just going to do Agaros Dunes on his legs, which is very similar to Skeleton Horde, like they are very similar colours, but just different enough for our purposes. It's kind of hard to tell whether his legs are meant to be trousers or skin, but you can do either, I guess. No one's gonna call you up on it. Okay. So now we've done sort of blocked out his clothes. Now I'm gonna do his skin next. Now I paint my orcs with sort of bluey purpley skin. Don't ask me why. I just kind of like it, and especially when I'm going for a very warm tone on the clothes, you know, it helps with the contrast on it. Now, I don't have a contrast paint that's kind of this blue, and I don't necessarily want to use that because contrast and this thing can be quite harsh. The first thing I want to do is soften up this dry brush that I've done. Dry brushes are quite harsh, they work quite well for clothes and armour and stuff. Skin not so much, you can't really get away with it. So what I've got is a little bit of white glaze. Now I'll be showing you how to make a glaze in just a second, but because I do a lot of white glaze, I bought a dedicated white glaze. Just gonna get it down, wick it off on my thumb. Some people wear gloves, by the way. As far as I understand, these paints are non-toxic, so I don't. And then we're just going to glaze his face with this white. And the reason I'm doing that is just to soften the effect. It will still show some of that dry brush that we've done and pick out the highlights, but it will sort of fill those low lights and just make it a bit less harsh. So when it comes to applying the skin, which we're going to do with glaze, yeah, it doesn't look really unnatural. So I'm just going over, finding where his skin is. So it looks like that in his hand, but some of that is armour. And just filling it in. Be nice and gentle, not using too much, because we don't want to completely destroy our undermask that we've made out of out of dry brushing. Just nice and careful. And there we go. Right, we'll wait for that to dry. Whilst we're doing that, we'll do the wood, which I use quite often. I use wildwood. The only problem is it's quite a thick paint, especially in the contrast range. Like, it destroys your undermask. So I am actually going to put this on the wet palette and just add a tiny bit of water. There is contrast thinner that Games Workshop do. I don't know if it's just the exact same stuff as glaze medium, but for something as small as this, it doesn't need to be done really, because I'm only doing a couple of things. Your wet palette itself will dilute paints as well, so bear that in mind when you're adding water. Your wet palette's already going to dilute the paints. It's only a small bit, but it can be noticeable. Oops, sorry, keep it under the thing for you. Cool. That white glaze looks like it's dry. A lot of this is done quite quickly because things dry quickly, like acrylics dry quickly. Maybe I'd give more time, and I'd probably be doing a batch if I was doing this normally. So I'd be doing like maybe 5 orcs at the same time. But it dries quick enough that we can kind of crack through this without too much worry. Now, a glaze is just a normal acrylic mixed with some glaze medium. And you kind of want to go 1-to-1-to-1 with water, pastel, water, acrylic and glaze medium. That's roughly right. By the way, I'm just using a slightly knackered brush to mix it, so I don't waste my good brushes on this. I think that kind of works out right. It varies depending on the acrylic, and I just kind of get it on my brush and then just test it on my finger to see if I think it's thin enough. I think that should be okay. And if it isn't, we're going to be doing some other stuff later to kind of make up for it. And then again, we're going over. We're painting it lightly. We're trying not to be too, put too much down, because we have, we've already done a lot of the work. Just trying to get some nice blue skin. And possibly this one was a bit thick, so I'll just push out over my wet palette, because that will thin it a little. And then do over his arm, his nice sinewy arm. Oh, sorry. Oh, I haven't really said why maybe you don't want to paint like this. The reason you don't want to paint like this necessarily is because it's a bit stunting. Like, you can't go much further from here. It's great if this is as far as you want to go, which is kind of what I've got. It's fine. It's great. But it doesn't really teach you anything. And things like edge highlighting, or if you learn how to do feathering, or wet blending, all those other techniques that you hear about, you can improve them, you can get better at them. These is kind of as good as it gets. I've made small improvements and changes over the years, but nothing major. And I think some people don't enjoy their painting skill stalling out like that. It works for me. I like it. I'm just going to do a bit more wildwood, because actually I don't like how light that is now. It works for me. I like it. I like that it gives my army a slightly distinct look. Not many other armies are painted quite like this. It's become more popular, people with doing contrast, because I used to do this before contrast came out. People doing contrast have realised that you can just dry brush to improve contrast. But yeah, I like it, and it's what I can do, but it's limiting for you, and some people don't like being limited and having kind of stick at a dead end painting skill style. Anyway, so we're going to move on to doing the leather. You have to bear with me. I've just realised I haven't picked out the colour that I was going to use for the leather. So I'm having to dig through my drawer. I would show you, but that would mean moving the camera that I have precariously balanced, because I'm not like a professional teach you how to paint a kind of guy. So when I do leather, I tend to use, this is Vallejo by the way, it's called Gaming, but it's from Vallejo, Skin Wash ink. Now I like inks. Inks I bought before contrasts were a thing. They're sort of like contrasts and glazes. They're a bit bolder than glazes, and less, like if you put them straight over white, they're just kind of a bit more flatter than contrasts. And this is only step one, because it will look a bit weird initially. It'll look very similar to the Griffhound. In fact, you could probably sub in the Griffhound. It would more or less work. But yeah, I started doing this before contrasts were a thing. So I'm just going around. Yeah, I've noticed that this guy's shield looks very leather. So it's giving this very orange look at the moment. That's fine. We'll be doing stuff to do that. And like inks, like glazes, like they leave what's below, so you can see it's still got the dark from below. And then his boots, I said, were also leather, and he's also got a leather belt. By the way, we'll be returning to the skin, but because it's been done with a glaze and there's a lot of water in a glaze, it takes a while to dry. You know, not forever, but not slow enough that I can't just jump straight on it. So I'm just painting his leather boots. Leather boots. In this heavy skin wash. Or skin ink. No, it's called skin wash. And we also want to do his belt. Belts were always the bane of my life before I realised how to paint with. You also see sometimes like I'm kind of double bracing. I've got it on this pot, and you can get professional ones, and I probably should invest in one. But I am kind of like bracing a lot, and you might see a slight tremor there in how he's being held. You don't want to hold him too tight, or he might think you're clingy. So, metal. Let's move on to the metal. Now, I'm not going to do anything special with this, because this is Vallejo Gunmetal Grey. And this really depends on the metal paint you're using, but I find often they are runnier than you'd expect and thinner than you'd expect. They look thick coming out, then they're a bit runnier, and especially if you kind of dab it around your wet palette a little, they'll end up being a bit more thin, which means, again, we'll keep the undermask. And the other advantage of that is, because yeah, these are orcs, I get the feeling that maybe their metallurgy is not 100%. It'll give it a slight variation underneath. It's also why I quite like doing this technique, because if you look at anything really, it's very rarely a solid colour. That's kind of a new thing that's come out of plastics. Plastics give you a fairly solid colour, at least when they're new. Maybe like anodized metal. Very few things in nature, and even when you paint stuff, like if you paint real things, big things, they're very rarely consistent forever. The sun wears things down, you get wear and tear all over them. And by doing the undermask, which, because it's a dry brush, is slightly gritty, you get that sort of by accident without having to do any work. And anything we can do which is without extra work is great. Just going to go along here, paint his arm protection. Everyone has arm protection. Do that. The top of his little war axe. I do like how in Lord of the Rings miniatures they're a bit more reasonable. Oh, I just realised there's some leather on his arm I could paint as well, so we'll go back to that. Yeah, you can see the wildwood's a little dark. It's kind of lost a lot of definition, which sucks. I probably should have left it as how it was. But I said this is kind of how I paint, and that includes making mistakes. This isn't going to be a polished painting tutorial. We'll do his helmet with the weird monocular visor that they have that makes them look like a Cylon more than anything. Around the back of his helmet, there. Got the crest of his helmet. And we're just covering the whole thing. You could leave it at this, to be honest, because you've got your highlights from how it's pooling. We're going to do a bit more. We'll dry brush this as well. But you could leave it at this. It's very warm light in here. I'm afraid it's the morning, so I'm having to use actual lights which are in this room warm. But that's no bother. I'm just going to go back and get a slightly smaller brush. I've not been saying what brushes I'm using because they're basically whatever I have to hand. And I've got a collection from over the years, so I'm just seeing that he seems to have like a strap here. We'll carefully make that. This is taking a fair bit of my concentration and effort to do. So shake my hand out because that took some doing, and then we'll do down there. I want a very warm model. That's one thing I really set out to do when I did this. It was a real warm model. I don't like to paint things too cold. Warm, messy, fun. Yeah. Some people I know use like hair dryers on a low setting to dry glazes and stuff. Perfectly acceptable as far as I'm concerned, but I don't have one in the room, so there we go. That's how he is right now, and we're almost there, really. A couple of things left to do. Whilst that metal's drying, it shouldn't take too long. We'll try and do a bit more face. Usually when I do like inhuman faces, I might still consider a bit of a flesh wash to bring out the warmth, and I do that with human faces. Like, it doesn't matter what kind of skin tone I'm doing, it will usually have a flesh wash in there because it just adds that warmth that humans naturally have. I tried doing that with these guys, I found it looked a bit funky, so instead I use purple tone, which has a bit of warmth in it. And actually I've seen people paint human skin using purple, because human skin actually is quite weird in how it interacts with light. But in this one we're just going to use purple tone and just get in there. And again we're layering on emphasis after emphasis by using a tone over a glaze which has been done over a dry brush which has been done over a glaze. We're just every time just putting a little bit more emphasis. And what tones do, by the way, is just pull in the crevices and really get in there. Yeah, they will affect what it looks like on top, but the main thing they'll do is pull in the crevices and really pick out the deep parts of the model. Cool, just like that. Lovely stuff. Usually I tend to brace against the table as well, but that would not look great for you guys, so just doing that. So, now we've done that. There's a couple of colours I want to enhance, because, that's fairly, with everything we've done, it's fairly deep, deep colours. But I want to enhance them a bit more, and that is going to involve tones again. Now, I use Army Painter tones, I should say. Quick shades. I like them, but they're glossy. And if you don't like that kind of glossy effect on your model, I wouldn't use them. I'm fine with them because I also hit my models with a gloss spray. I quite like kind of slightly glossy effect on my models. I know it's not natural looking, but it's something that I quite like. I don't like matte spray, but I wouldn't do it if you really don't like glossy models. I'd use something else like Citadel. And all the orange I'm going to try and enhance with this red. It will go over the top, it will give it a slightly redder look, which will help it distinguish from the leather we're going to do as well. And then just go all over, and it again will go into those recesses Oh, that was the belt. Well, that's right. We'll fix that. It'll go into the recesses as well and really, really emphasise the deep parts we've done. Go along there. He's got it along his chest there. It just makes it redder. That's all it does. Just a bit redder. It's a very subtle difference, but that's kind of what you want. You want to deal in subtle, and where I've done is sort of like brown clothes. I'm going to use a bit of dark tone, maybe a bit less liberal with it. You know, maybe give it, again, spread it around the wet palette a bit to dilute it, rather than whack it straight on. And just go down, and again that will enhance the depth on that and also make it look dirtier. You know, I think orcs get a bit of a bad rap in Lord of the Rings, but I will paint their clothes dirty anyway. And then the trousers. What have we got? I've got a yellow wash somewhere, but it's from Vallejo, and if there's one thing Vallejo's not great at, it's their washes. They just don't work as well. I'm not sure what's the problem with them. I bought a load. They just don't do the job, and it's a shame because their inks do a fantastic job. I mean, let's use one of their sepia shades just so it's a slightly different game wash. It's just they're not quite as good. Like the rest of Vallejo's range are fantastic, but I just found their washes weren't quite the same standard. But we'll use it anyway, and this is one of the better ones. Their black wash, actually, I'm kind of giving them a bit of a hard time. Their black wash is fairly good. It's mostly the green wash that really just let me down. I think partly it just doesn't mix. Oh, back onto the camera. So again, there's nothing special here. I'm just touching little bits. And all I'm trying to do there is also, like, when colours like Agrigros Dune and Skeleton Horde look quite similar to each other, so if I find things looking too similar, I'll go over with a wash of different colours to kind of, give them a bit of difference. So there we go, this is how we're at now. Now, the leather. I've been promising stuff about the leather. I kind of stumbled across this by mistake. I used Flesh Wash, or Skin Wash from the Game Ink, and then I used their black ink. Just holding it up so I don't pour it everywhere. Precious black ink. Now, I don't want to use this too thickly, so I'm just going to spread it out. Could possibly use some glaze medium. I'm not going to. I'm just going to use some water. And what I'm going to try and do is focus it in the middle of where the skin wash is. Focus it in the middle. Push it around a bit. In fact, I've put a little bit too much water in there because it's doing a bit of pooling. Let's try and get a slightly thicker mixture. Again, painting with Badger Bodges, mostly mistakes. And yeah, so I try and put it sort of in the middle, and then what I've already painted kind of serves as a highlight. Now leather also, you have the advantage when you paint leather is leather naturally is quite a varied it's quite a varied look. If you ever look at something leather, it's not a consistent look because it has scratches, it flexes, it gets scuffed and torn. So this is a way of kind of doing that scuffing and tearing in one kind of go. It also gets water damaged, which is great because, some of the pooling might look more like water damage. I mean, admittedly, that more occurs to like soft leather that you'd make clothes out of rather than hard leather that maybe you'd want to cover a shield with. But we'll just casually ignore that. And then on the boots, I'm just going, and again, highlights are doing themselves. Where I've done the skin wash, because I'm trying to avoid doing the edges too much and mostly focus on the middle, it kind of does its own highlights, it does its own cracking. Does it look as good as people who put loads of effort into doing nice lines and stuff? No, it doesn't. But it does the job and it does it quickly. Also notice I've kind of knocked on this guy's hair, so I'm just going to use black for that. Again, probably being a bit harsh on orcs right now, but I kind of imagine them with greasy black hair. I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I inherited these models. Um, but as far as I understand, elves used to hunt orcs for sport. Was that a thing? So, like, no wonder they're angry in it. That's legit. You do you, orcs. Okay, we've only got a couple of things left to do now. So the skin, it's the first time you're going to see me mix paints. I don't tend to mix paints. I've lost my white. It's just gone off the table. I think I dry brush this with ivory. See, I'm too busy talking. I was saying about how, I'll do it in white because, ivory I found was a bit too muted. I think I did it in white because I was talking to you guys and just completely missed. I mean, it doesn't make too much of a difference. There you go. More painting with badger bodges. I just completely forget and do stuff, especially if I'm trying to talk to a camera, which I don't usually do. I'm going to do pastels as well. Pastel blue again for the skin, and I'm going to mix it with some white. And this is the only time you really see me mix paints. I try and avoid doing it too much because it's hard to get the consistency down. But the good thing about skin is, skin's not consistent. People with the same skin type, it's not consistent. So I don't mind if there's a little bit of inconsistency in how the skin goes, because that's how skin goes. Technically, there's not really any consistency in like clothes as well, but I think it shows more if you've done it slightly wrong. Whereas skin, it should look different. And I'm just going to gently. I think I'm going to spot this actually. So spotting is sort of highlighting, but instead of trying to follow a real solid line, you just kind of put some small spots in where you think there should be colour. So I'm going to spot it up there, spot his chin, like that. Try not to get on his teeth, because like I say, his teeth kind of work from... So I'm not trying to get like really long, precise highlights. I'm just trying to spot where his skin, would naturally catch the light a bit more, and just try and poke it, basically. And this takes a fair bit of concentration. Don't know if you can see like that kind of twitch. As I say, mine's not bad. It's just stuff like this is a little tiring, so I'm just splodging it at him. There we go, that'll do. Ooh. Shake your arm out. Now all that's left to do is the metal. Metal is... Now, like I say, you probably could leave it at that. It's a bit flat, but it's not the worst. Do it with silver. So I just use Vallejo silver for most highlighting on metal. You see I've gone from like quite a dark look with the gunmetal to the silver, so there's hopefully going to be some contrast here. You could easily do some black ink to really bring it down before you highlight it, but I'm not going to. By the way, just dried it out, dry brushed it out on my apron again. And then just dry brush all over. I've had the same painting apron since I began painting models at 11. And I used to be able to wrap it, the tie cord round me twice, and I had to tie it at the front. It ties at the back now. Now I'm a bit older. Fair bit older than 11. And again, I'm just dry brushing and very lightly going over all of the metal with the silver, just trying to catch the edges. That's what we're trying to do with dry brushing, catch the edges. And I've seen there's a bit there that looks a bit... doesn't look as painted in as the rest, so I'm just going to get my Griffhound and just give it a quick splodge up there. It's a tiny bit. Keep an eye out for where you've missed bits. It's fine. We all miss bits. We all make little mistakes, and then we just fix them. Jolly good. So there you go. That's more or less the model done, except where I've completely neglected his belt. Again, You miss stuff, you make mistakes. It's fine. Just... part of me wonders whether I should not put this up because I've made the mistake of using the wrong highlight, but for one, it kind of still works, and for two, I feel like people should be comfortable with, oh, I've made a mistake. Especially if it doesn't affect the overall product that much, Painting's all about learning. Everything's about learning. Painting's all about learning. You make little mistakes, you move on. As long as you're kind of happy with the result at the end, it's all good. Now, the base. The bases bring together a model, and you can do them fairly quickly. What I'm going to use, I've left the brown. I've not worried too much the fact that I've dry brushed a little bit of the beige on, maybe even a little bit of the ivory, as I've now realised I was using. And I'm going to be using other stuff to really add to the base. Now, usually I'd spray the model, I'd lacquer it first, and then do this, or at least before I put all the stuff on that I'm going to put on. But I want to get this all done on one camera roll, so we're just gonna stick with it. Like I say, this is a quick technique, and I'm trying to do it all on camera to kind of show you how quick it can be, and how many mistakes I make. So that's just some Iraqi sand that I've added to it. Now, I like to add, for my fantasy models, grass and leaves. Grass you can get from most shops. Leaves, how do you get leaves, you ask? Tea leaves, red tea specifically, caffeine free, which is even better for me because caffeine makes me shake more. So we use caffeine free tea to fuel me, naturally caffeine free, and as an added bonus, one of the tea bags split and it makes excellent leaves. So I'm just using some Wilco clear glue. I don't think you need anything crazy good for bases. If you're doing it for terrain, which is going to be rough handled, maybe you do want some fairly decent stuff. And I'm just dabbing the glue on. I'm not doing it absolutely everywhere, because we want some of this original Iraqi sand brown mix to show through. I'm putting it around. Then I'm also going to be using just some kind of fake grass, and this is proper model stuff. I think it cost me like 10 quid for the bag. It's fairly expensive, but I've never really found a suitable replacement that you can just kind of pick up, so it's had to be that. Let's put that over my wet palette, and then over your thing, just drop on the stuff. You want to do it over it so that you can just pick it back up. This is my dedicated glue and leaves palette, and then I'm just going to add a bit more glue where I think I've missed stuff, where I think there could be more, and also over some of the leaves as well, because we're going to want to add the grass. Make sure to get under their legs as well, and between their legs, because you'll I often miss it and then you realise there's just a really sparse bit of terrain. And again with this, we're just going to drop it over. We're going to drop it over the pot, shake it off. There we go. Based. If anything, this one's quite aggressive for me. I don't tend to do that much. I tend to leave a bit more sand, but it is what it is. So put this away. There's some clump foliage in there, but I'm not going to do that. It doesn't look right on little models. Wash that brush out before it sticks to itself. Put that to one side. And now, the finishing touch. Some people, edge their bases similar to the terrain. Some people give them names and labels. I don't tend to do that on something like an orc. Rank and file soldier. I tend to trim them in black. I miss the days of goblin green edges, they were great days, but it doesn't work kind of with my style of being quite dark. Not dark, that's the wrong term, but it hasn't got that kind of 90s smoothness. I tend to do them in black, and all of my armies are done like this. So I like to mix and match stuff. Like, I don't play Lord of the Rings. Oh, taking a leaf with me. I don't play Lord of the Rings. I'm going to be using these as just generic fantasy models, and I like all of my models to at least look semi-coherent on the table together, which is why I follow the same painting, not paint scheme, but paint techniques for all of them. And often, like, actually, like the leather, I do almost always the same way. Oh, and we realise, as always, that we've missed something, and that's fine. Just missed the lever on his arm that holds his gauntlet on. It's not gauntlet, is it? It's protecting his arms, so I don't know what they're called. Maybe they're gauntlets. And there we go. Now I'm going to take this to the shed to spray him with just a clear lacquer. I tend to use a glossy lacquer. But that's how I paint an orc. I will probably title this video How Not to Paint an Orc, because, like I say, it's limiting. You can't go much better than this with the techniques I've showed you. You can vary it so you make sure you get your, like, how runny things are right. That's true. You can be a bit more precise with your dry brush, use better brushes, use the right colour rather than ivory. You know, actually use white, like I said. Or maybe I put it back in the drawer, I don't know. I'm not used to talking to a camera and painting, so I'm going to have made a few mistakes. Maybe you apply the white glaze all over to soften things out, but overall, if you want to get something painted quick, I mean, this has taken, what, 40 minutes, maybe? That's how you paint a single model fairly quickly with, I think, adequate results. So, happy painting, those of you who are painting. Happy learning how people paint, people who are not painting. Those of you who have a little bit of a shake like me, best of luck. Hope you learn some techniques to help you get around it. And those with serious ones, I hope you find someone to paint your models for you. Or just don't mind and have unpainted models, which is absolutely legit. And I shall see you all later.